Hey watch friends, fasten your seatbelts and get ready to channel your inner racer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Straton Daily Driver MKII. And I personally got myself suitably prepared for this watching the movies Rush as well as Ford vs. Ferrari. If you haven't checked those out, definitely good flicks and good follow-up to this one. So first let's take a quick look in case you missed the unboxing. It does come in this nice travel pouch here. This I believe is a leather. Unfortunately I think it is a real leather, which is good for some of you, not for me. Does come with a booklet inside, has a flap here to protect the lower, and then down at the bottom you have a single cutout. So this is a single watch pouch. But there is already an unboxing video. If you haven't checked that out, it's in my channel description. Alright, so looking at the watch itself, as far as the included parts, you obviously saw the pouch. It comes with an outer sleeve over that pouch that you'll see in the unboxing. It comes standard on this bracelet, and it comes with a booklet. I believe that's everything that's included. It does come with a standard 2-year warranty. And then getting into the total specs of this one, it is a 44mm case. At the lugs, it is going to be a standard size of 22 millimeters, and I did measure that on calipers. It does come in right at 44. For the lug-to-lug, looking at the case itself, this is coming in at 52.1 millimeters, so this is not a real small guy, and as you can see there, this does have some scuffs on the side. I should mention, this was a review sample that was sent in for review, so this was loaned to the channel, so if you see any marks throughout, that's not the way that it would ship in a brand new one. Back to the lug-to-lug. Looking at the bracelet here, as you can see, this one does have male end links on the bracelet. Unfortunately, because of those male end links, this does extend it out to a whopping 59.4 millimeters. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and right off the bat, let's slap this on wrist so you can see it on my 6.5-inch wrist. As you'll see, and we'll talk about this more throughout the video, it does have a slight overhang. I'd say this is right at the threshold for my 6.4, 6.5 inch wrist. So do note that up front. I think it wears nicely overall, but I'll talk about further. This one for me would be a strap wearer for exactly that reason. I think it's sufficient without the bracelet on a smaller wrist, but with the bracelet, I think it is pushing it for a smaller wrist. If you have a larger wrist, not a problem at all. For the thickness, as we saw from the side here, this one is a little bit chunky. It is 13.7 millimeters, and that is to the top of this flat sapphire crystal. And as you can see there, it does sit very slightly proud of the bezel, but only ever so slightly. And while we're talking about the crystal, as I mentioned, this is sapphire, and it does have an inner AR coating. As for the movement on this one, this is one of the basic Stratons, or I should say entry-level Straton models, so this does come with a quartz movement. There are other models that are available with a mecha quartz movement, as well as with a full automatic movement. This particular quartz is a Miyota 6S21 for your specs there. As for water resistance, this is coming standard with 20 atmospheres or 200 meters, so plenty sufficient, and especially with having your pushers for your chrono, I think that's very respectable. It does have a screw-down crown, which we'll talk about here shortly. As for weight, this one actually feels a little heavier on my wrist than it does on the scale, though it is not a light one on the scale either. Size to my 6.5-inch wrist, this is coming in at 175.6 grams. So definitely not a featherweight. It's not terrible as far as overall weight, but do know this is going to be for someone who likes a little more of a stout feel on the wrist overall. I do suspect that having this on strap will lighten up the feel significantly. So if you like lighter watches, that's always an option for you as well. So now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and look at some of the individual characteristics, take a little bit deeper of a dive into this specific model. For the colors, this is available in a few different dial options, and I'll pop those up on the screen here so we can check those out. Then looking at the overall, as far as the dial texture, as you can see, this one is a matte dial, and it is a pretty flat matte to it. It has maybe just ever so slight touch of satin to it, but I would call this one pretty flat, and I believe that's true for each of the colorways. One of the real standouts for this is this dashboard style inner cluster that this has. So being a chronograph, the overall configuration and layout, as you can see, it does have 2 sub dials right in the center. This right one is going to be for your standard time, 60 seconds. And then on the left here, this is going to be for your chrono, and that is a 60-minute timer there for that. The indexes, looking around for this is going to have a mix. So the indexes are applied. Same thing with the logo there. You can see that is thin, but it is applied as well. And then looking at the font down at the bottom, you can see that is printed for that. This does have a date window, and it is a framed date window at the 6 o'clock position. And it does on the perimeter have a nice rehaut, as you can see there, which has a good color mix. This particular one is going to be black with the white stripes, and then it does have, at your 5-minute increments, it does have the orange accent, which I think complements the overall aesthetic for this. While we're talking about the orange accents, let's shift over to the handset. So on the hands for this, as you can see for the main hands, it does have for your minute and your hour hand, it does have a pencil style, I would call it, and it does have loom application there, and we'll pop up a loom shot of this. As you can see from the loom, it does have a decent loom application for both the hands as well as most of the markers. It is missing on the 3, 6, and 9 positions for that, but because this doesn't have a loom second hand, it's going to be a good reference point for you, but certainly there's not a whole lot to watch in terms of video footage here for that one. But overall, I think it's nice for the style, and I think it's good touches. As far as looking at the style of the markers, you can see that this does have principally baton markers. Let's get a side angle of that. As you can see, the batons do have a little bit of a curvature going onto them to make them more interesting, not just a straight baton for that. And as we just mentioned, those are loomed, and they do have a nice outer polished lip on the exterior to match the handset. Switching over to the accent hands, you have your chronograph second hand, which is your large second here. And then you have your primary time second hand, as well as your minute sub-dial there. Each of those has your has an orange accent on this particular colorway. So nice aesthetic touch there. For the bezel, this one does, as you can see, have a fixed bezel, and it does line perfectly with the case there. So it is very flush to the case. This does have a tachymeter, as you can see, and this is, I believe, a black enamel. So this is etched into there, and it does have black enamel finishing for that, which I always think is a nice and attractive look. And as you can see, going around the perimeter, it does flip, so that way you're always looking at vertical text, which is nice. Looking at the overall finishing, as you can see here, it does have brushing throughout. That's on every surface. This one does not have any polish mix, which I think does fit to the overall style. So you can see different brushing applied depending on what angle you're looking at. So I still think it's visually attractive. And overall, I found this to be well finished, of course, accepting the handling marks that this particular one has. For the styling of this, I would call this a chunky slab style case. Not really a lot going on there. It does have a little bit of a chamfer down at the bottom, and then of course just a slight edge, chamfered edge up at the top of the bezel as well. But overall, this is more of what I would call a slab style for that. Looking at the lugs, as you can see, this does have slight downturn to the lugs. It looks a little more pronounced, I think, looking at it from the profile than it feels on the wrist for this. I would call these a pretty gradual downturn, more so than it's picking up or looks like on camera. This particular one, unlike the Signums that we've looked at, does not have drilled lugs. However, this does have relatively easily accessible, of course, for a bracelet, for removing those spring bars. Looking at the flip side here, at the 3 o'clock side, you can see this one does have your traditional chrono configuration. You have your 2 pushers, and let's go ahead and actually activate that while we're talking here. So your top one is, of course, going to get your second hand moving there, and then you can hit that to stop, and you can hit the bottom to reset, and let's watch that quartz movement go around. I always think that's fun to watch. And as we saw in the unboxing video, a relatively smooth sweep for that second hand for that. It's not the tick like you see here on the second sub-dial for the primary time. So I think that functions well. And of course, quartz, they definitely, they're a little more rugged as far as you don't have to be as sensitive to vibrations and those kind of things. You do have to change the battery, but they're always set for you. You don't have to worry about winding or keeping it in motion or anything along those lines. So quartz have nice simplicity there. For the crown, this one does have a screw down crown, as we mentioned. The crown threading I found to be very smooth, as well as the manipulation of the action. And then flipping that over to look at the crown, as you can see, this does have a nice raised sign crown to that. And I do think that finishing application on that, I think it's nice looking. And as signed crowns go, I think that is one of the better looking ones. All right, switching over to the case back. As you can see here, this one does have a relatively simplistic, of course, sticks with the automotive theme for that. It has just basic clean dial text, somewhat of an almost cursive style to that. For the font choice, you have your car in the middle there, and this is, of course, a screw down case back, as we mentioned there, and that keeps with the overall water resistance that they were able to achieve. So overall, it is just a clean brushed finish throughout there, and it is relatively minimalist and a nice looking nice looking touch, I think, for this. And of course, no sharp or hot spots on that because it is relatively minimal. Shifting over to the bracelet, as you can see here, the bracelet, consistent with the lug dimensions, this is 22 millimeters at the top. This does taper down to 20 millimeters at the clasp. Speaking of the clasp, let's go ahead and close this up again. This does have a fold over and double pusher for that. The bracelet itself is going to be an H-link style, and again, this is going to be full brushing throughout, as is the clasp. The bracelet is retained with pins on this one, and you can see, if I can get that to focus there, you might be able to see the arrows there we go. Got one of the arrows showing up there. So this does have, of course, links removed, so it's relatively tight on the sizing there. But it does have the arrows pushing to indicate the pins for you in the correct movement. As far as the articulation on this, the one real weak point of this is, of course, with having a male end link, it does not have great articulation. Not bad, for considering the fact that it's a very protruding male end link, but it doesn't have amazing articulation there. But where it does is check out each of these links. Fantastic articulation on the rest of the bracelet. So I have found this does drape nicely over the wrist, or I should say around the wrist. It's just a matter of getting over the wrist if you do have a smaller wrist. So do keep that in mind. As mentioned, this for the clasp here, the fold over, this does have 3 micro adjustment holes on that, so you are able to get that fine-tuned for overall sizing. So outside of the end links, I think this is a well-executed bracelet. I think it fits well. I think it's comfortable. I think it fits the overall design and aesthetic. So overall, I think it's a good choice. All right, so shifting over, let's look at a couple comparables. So as I mentioned, this, when I say comparables, mainly just looking at sizing. So for available options for me, 44, and then here is the Zelos Hammerhead 44. As you can see, this one is chunkier here on the left, though it does have a smaller dial, so that gives you an idea as far as presence there. Looking at a Zelos Sky Raider, this one's a 42, so that gives you an idea there with having a fixed bezel, how that kind of stacks up as far as overall sizing. And the one that I neglected to show you, but do have coming up for the channel here, actually just received this Matterhorn Dive Master in for review, so that gives you an idea as how that one looks. This is a 41 for that one. Now, bringing these watches back, as I mentioned, I personally would run this on straps. This gives you an idea as to what this could look like with some strap pairings. I personally like this. This is a Hadley Roma Cordura on there, and this is, I believe, the sand color. I'll have links to these Amazon affiliate links in the description. If you'd like to help out the channel, it is appreciated to use those for any of your purchases. It doesn't even have to be these items, and it doesn't charge you anything. Next up, we're looking at a helm. This is one of my go-to. You've seen this on the channel a lot. I love these helm canvas straps. Dirt cheap for what they are. Great quality, very thick, nice rigidity, and supports heavier watches like this, and this is available in several colors. So I'll have a link to that in the description as well. So that gives you an idea as to some possible options there. All right, so now that we have all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get to my personal positives, some critiques, as well as the overall closing thoughts and feedback for this one. So first and foremost, I didn't mention the price. The price for this is coming in at $279, which I think is a very compelling price point, and I think is one of the most attractive things. I think for this, I think you get a well put together watch for a price under $300. It's not going to break the bank. It has the quartz simplicity, has a lot going for it. Visually, I think this is very appealing. I think it fits for the overall aesthetic with the racing theme. I think it's a nicely executed chronograph overall, and I love the dashboard cluster in the middle there, so I think that's well done. As we mentioned several times, quartz simplicity. While I'm not always a huge quartz fan, I do think with a small second hand, you don't really notice too much of that abrupt tick as opposed to the nice smooth sweep. So that's, I think, pretty much a non-issue there for me. And changing a battery once every few years, honestly, not that big of a deal. If you use a chronograph a ton, yeah, you can drain the battery quicker, but suck it up, spend the couple bucks. And of course, if you're anti-quartz, please don't take offense to that one. All right, as far as the overall build quality, as I mentioned, this is, I think, a pretty stout build construction. I think the overall finishing is pretty well done. It's not, as you would expect, completely and totally flawless in all regards. There are some things that could be cleaned up and a little bit nicer, but overall, not really many, if any, complaints as far as the total finishing. All right, so looking at some of the critiques that I have for it personally, the end links. As we already talked about, the end links, I would like to see the actual lug-to-lug would be great if they could get that down at or under 50 millimeters. I think that'd make it a little more versatile. Even if that can't be accomplished, I can live with the 52, that male end link bumping it up to 59.5. almost. That for me is a bit too much. So I would like to see this be either a female end link or at least somehow pull that back a little closer there, just to make this a little more wrist versatile for many people. The sub-dial alignment, if you check in, let's zoom in on that, you might be able to see there's just a slight misalignment. Honestly, it's one of those things. That's kind of what comes with quartz movements. One, it's a sub-dial. Two, it's such a minuscule difference. To me, it's really pretty much a non-issue, but I did want to mention it. Back to the wrist friendliness. As I mentioned, if you do have small wrist, this may not be the watch for you because of the thickness as well as the lug to lug. So I would say if you're below 6.5 inches, unless you like big watches, it's probably a bit too big for you. If you're anything at or above 6.5 inches, I think it's very workable, and it just depends on your overall style preference. Finally, I do think this one wears kind of large and kind of heavy overall, as we've seen this on wrist because of the chunkiness, because of the overall weight. It, to me, does feel, even on the bracelet, a tiny bit top heavy, though not horribly so. So do be aware of that if you're somebody who is sensitive to heavy wrist, or heavy watches rather, on your wrist. That's something to be mindful of as a minor critique. But I think it's easily enough solved with a bracelet, or with a strap rather, as opposed to the bracelet, to work that out. So finally, where does that leave us? I think for sub $300, I think this is a good overall quality chronograph option. I think it has a very clear and well-executed racing vibe. And I think overall, if this aesthetic appeals to you, I don't think you can go wrong with it, which I found to be true with the various Stratons as well as Signums that I've checked out. They check a lot of boxes for people, and I think are very good options. So overall, I hope this review has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed this, please do hit that like button. And additionally, if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to find me on another medium, you can find me on Instagram. Thanks for watching.